Hello, guys. Welcome all to this session where I would like to discuss a subtopic about how to discourage wild birds from eating chicken feed. Sometimes, guys, um, you find that farmers get difficult time when feeding their chicken. Sometimes they provide the feeds, but to a great extent, these feeds are being eaten by wild birds. Wild birds, in this case, we are referring to those birds that have not been intended to be part of the poultry, the chicken. So wild bird in this case might be the ducks, the doves, etc. Now, to do this, guys, it requires that you implement some strategies to make sure that the feeds are less accessible and less attracted, or they are less attractive to the wild birds. So how do you or which type of strategies do you implement so that you get uh, to discourage the wild birds? One of the strategies, the first one, is to use elevated feeders. When we talk about elevated feeders, these are feeders that have been raised some meters above the ground so that they are suspended overhead over the other structures. So you'll realize that these one make these feeders and the feed in them to be less accessible by the wild birds. Another point, another strategy that you need to use, you as a poultry farmer, another strategy, you need another strategy, you need to use covered feeders. Covered what? Feeders. Place the chicken feeders inside covered or enclosed area that allow chickens to access the feed while discouraging the wild birds from doing what? From reaching the feeds. Um, you can as well use some structures which have small openings or weighted lids that only opens when the chicken steps on those lids. So when such structures are used, you realize that the wild birds will be discouraged from coming along where the feeders have been placed. Another point, guys, farmers, it is very important to note that when you want to use these feeders, and you be sure that the feeds inside the feeders will only be fed by the chicken, then you have to install a cage or use a wire mesh around the area that you around that area that surrounds the chicken. So you need to surround the chicken feeders with a wire mesh, or you can create a barrier that prevents the wild birds using this wire mesh. So using this wire mesh around the feeders, you'll realize that the wild birds will not access, they'll have hard time accessing the what? The feeders. Therefore, you limit um, these feeds for your chicken not being taken or not being eaten by the wild birds. So another one, you have to limit access to feeds. How do you limit the access to feeds? These feeds are only meant for your chicken. Therefore, you have to limit the access. It is you as a farmer who will put some um, boundaries or some limits. When do you really want to feed your chicken? At what time in the day? Sawa sawa? That is when you will be able to even discourage the wild birds. At some point you may offer chicken feed only during specific times of the day when the chickens are most likely to eat or they are most likely active Therefore, they may consume this feed. So if, for example, if you decide to feed your chicken at 8 a.m. in the morning, maybe your next feeding time maybe afternoon around 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. Then the next feeding time maybe around the evening when they are about to the sunset is about to is nearing. So you make sure that you provide specific times when you feed your what, your chicken. So when such a time, for example, if you fed your chicken at 8 a.m., you make sure that you remove those feeders after that period. You remove them, you store them in a place where they may not be accessed again by those chicken until you personally provide the feeders for the chicken. Another method or another strategy that you'll use to discourage the wild birds, use feed with deterrent additives. Deterrent additives, these are additives that are uh, they are not friendly to the wild birds. For example, you can use the chills pepper, you can use the bitter tasting substances. These will make the feed to become less attractive or to become less palatable by the wild birds. You'll realize that maybe for the first time, you'll realize that the wild birds may come and taste or take and eat on the feeds. But once they realize that there is a lot of bitterness, they will be discouraged from coming back again to do what? To take or to eat the feeds. So this one will help you as a poultry farmer to discourage them automatically. So once they see the feeds, they will be thinking of the spices or the bitterness of that feed. So therefore, this one will discourage them from coming and eating the feeds. Another point, farmers, at some point we become very ignorance, and this really punishes us. You realize that during the eating time of this chicken, there are some spills. You've given them some feeds, they have eaten, others have been scattered um, in the surroundings, but you don't clean that surrounding. So this attracts the wild what? The wild birds. For example, the doves. The doves, once they see some scattered food on the ground, they'll automatically come to collect and eat that, the feeds. So you make sure that when you've already fed up your chicken, make sure you go back, clean regularly, all the time. Make sure that place is very clean to discourage the wild birds. Another one, you can use scare tactics, some tactics that may scare the wild birds from coming along or reaching the feeders. You can use a visual deterrents or noisemakers. You can use a motion activated uh, devices. You can use uh, and other objects, reflective objects, wind chimes, or you can use as well scarecrows. This will help discourage. Uh, it will scare the what? The wild birds. When you use, for example, reflective objects, once the object reflects, the birds thinks that there is an individual there doing what? Uh, there is a presence of a person in that area. Therefore, they may be discouraged of coming along or around that place. You can do regular maintenance. Farmers sometimes become very much weak, or sometimes become ignorant. When the feeders become weary, when the feeders get a damage, we do not take our time repairing these feeders. So you realize that if your feeder has already been tampered with, some holes which are not intended to be there continues to be bigger, allowing the wild birds to get into the feeders. So, for example, at some point, a big wild animal may interfere with your wire mesh around that you've surrounded around the feeders. Now, what do? You don't just stop. You don't just look at it with your eyes. You do what? Next, you take another step where you prepare. So this one will increase the effectiveness of these uh, materials or structures. Lastly, I want us to talk about providing an alternative. You provide an alternative feeding areas. For example, if you've prepared a section of feeding your chicken, make sure that you also prepare another section where you can throw the waste, the leftovers, uh, so that when the wild animals or wild birds comes, they can land there. As they eat there, they will end up being satisfied before they get closer to the feeders of your chicken. So you can provide those areas. So you bring an offer, or you offer wild animals or wild birds alternative feeding areas away from the chicken feeders. For example, you can use bird feeders stocked with the seeds, stocked with the grains, or even the what? Uh, some leftovers. So that allows a landing area for the what? For the wild birds. So guys, farmers, as I conclude this lesson, I want to appreciate for your time, and at the same time, I will wish to urge you as you watch, you watch, as you like, remember to subscribe and share to your friends or to various groups so that they may get to be to be enriched with this content about discouraging the wild birds from doing what? From eating the chicken feeds. We do this because the economy of our country of our country is not very much friendly, and therefore we don't want losses from the first day. You've begun, um, you've just begun doing poultry farming, and here are the wild birds taking part of your feeds, which are not budgeted for them. Therefore, this will bring early losses, and at the end of it all, you'll realize that we get losses unexpectedly. So to do uh, we need to be very keen so that we prevent these losses. That's why I've, I've decided to share with you these tips on how you can discourage the wild birds from getting into or being part of the feeding animals of your feeds that you provide for your chicken. Lastly, I wish you a nice time, even as you plan to promote me in this uh, channel. If you forgot, if you forgot the channel name, you just click or you type at Jose 2 slashes Jomwicha, then you'll get me, and you like, watch, subscribe, and share to your friends. Good time and nice moments.